Hello and welcome to another episode of Marketing Tech Conversations between Dorai Thodla and Pravin Shekar. And this is part three of what we've been talking about in terms of competitive intelligence, but then a segue into technology intelligence. And today we hope to cover the process of technology intelligence. And Dorai, as you know, is a tech geek, a teacher, and a whole lot of things. And what he also does as a preparation for our conversation is keeps sending across links and different points for us to read and work with. Now, Dorai, thank you for HG Insights blog and a few other articles that you sent across. And I come from a background of marketing and market research. And because we're going to talk about the process of technology intelligence, I don't see it too different from what we do in the world of market research, which is we have an objective, and based on that, we go ahead and collect data, either secondary data or primary data. We analyze and work on it all specific to the objective, come up with the findings, make a report. In some cases, the insights lead into action, which have a variety of aspects. But I'm sure you're going to be sharing some statistics where what we do is just blown up in a completely different aspect with multiple, well, big data. That word does come in, but there are several sources that they would need to look at from a technology landscape perspective. Now, that is my understanding of the process. How near or far am I from whatever I said? And I am, of course, putting on the hat on my bald head of that of a layperson, Dorai, and pass it back to you.
Okay, hi Pravin and hi everyone. So this is it's kind of interesting one. What you said is exactly right at a very abstract level, right? The same thing can apply to market research and can apply to business intelligence or competitive intelligence and competitor intelligence. All at the level of details change in each one of those things. And so let us talk about. I know that we informally agreed on, we'll talk about the process, but when I hear the term process, it puts me to sleep. And I said, but there are a lot of people who swear by process. You have to have a process. Otherwise, yeah, agreed. You need to have something that is repeatable kind of thing. The interesting thing is the amount of fluctuation between same two processes. So I'll broadly put it into like 3 or 4 buckets. Say, first of all, you need to find the sources, right? And in market research, secondary sources and then primary sources. Yes. Sometimes they have interactions, like your secondary source will lead to some primary source and some primary source will lead to some secondary sources kind of thing, right? For market data. So same thing is true. You start with a few set of sources and we'll elaborate that a little bit. And then you start monitoring the sources and then you kind of validate the sources and maybe rank them kind of mentally, not very strict ranking, but you know that this source is closer to the space that you're talking about than some other source, for example. Like a CTO or a CEO working on a startup that is actually building an artificial intelligence application is much closer to the space than a journalist writing about that application through an interview process, for example. They bring an entirely different angle, but both of them are sources. You're going to get data from both of them for doing it. So once you decide on sources, you start gathering the data from the source. And there are a wide variety of sources. I think we talked about a diagram like a couple of days ago on all the web sources of information.
Right.
And so we'll not go back to the diagram, but we'll talk informally about what is a good source. Then we constantly monitor the source, and then you'll find out in monitoring the sources that some data changes. Some of them generate data constantly, and some of them are fairly static. And there are companies that have not changed their website for 20 years, and or not done anything major. So you kind of figure out, okay, it's not necessary for me to just go and start looking at them fairly frequently. Start reducing the frequency. Somewhat like what the Google search algorithm does. If Google has to visit your page again and again and again and again, you need to have fresh content again and again and again. So, you'll start saying, okay, I don't have fresh content. Okay, I'm going to come a little less frequently and a little less frequently. That it's a known algorithm in the industry. So you monitor the sources and then you monitor the changes. And I'll get less abstract about it when we take an example and run through the whole thing.
Right.
And then once you gather the data, and you also gather some amount of time series data, in the sense that, okay, this is what is happening, at a regular intervals kind of thing. For example, not necessarily from the same source, but also how the information hops across different sources. Let us say that, there is we talked earlier about the velocity of propagation, right?
Yes.
And we talked about, TikTok or Clubhouse yesterday, kind of stuff. And sometimes, because of the internet, it spreads very fast. But some information doesn't spread. It takes a long time to spread. It takes a while. So what are the slow moving items and what are the like fast moving items which grabs people's attention, that kind of stuff. And so you track the frequency and the velocity, and the volume of content change, for example. So you look at them, and then you start drawing inferences, saying, okay, start drawing inferences in a wide variety of
Right.
things. So what this process is not like a straight flow. It's kind of recursive, in the sense that as I'm monitoring, for example, let's say I start reading a blog post of somebody who came up as an expert, and then start writing about artificial intelligence in education. And then you start reading these posts, and then they start doing references to others. And then you start going to those references, and then finding out that some of these references were old. They've been blogging for 20 years earlier than this person, but they're blogging about an entirely different aspect of education. Learning theory and this and that kind of thing, styles of learning and mental models and all that kind of stuff. So you start getting those kinds of information. So you discover some new sources, and you take and add them to the list of your sources. Now you start monitoring those sources too.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting process where you go through the steps, and then you come back to the previous step because of something that you gain. That is one way, is the references. The other way is gaps. You find this and said, hey, there is this big missing gap that nobody is talking about. Why is that? And I'll tell you one interesting concept about the missing nothing concept.
Right.
A favorite of mine. I don't know whether I talked to you about it before.
No, you haven't.
So there are. So once we start fighting gaps, why isn't anybody talking about the ethics in AI? Why is everybody taking whatever the recommendation being given as gospel truth? And I mean, why are they taking these predictions and just acting on them? Or are they really taking all these things? Or
right.
If they're not, then what else are they doing? What are they doing with these predictions? And so I remember this is almost like 20 years ago when I demonstrated my product first, saying, very excited and saying, oh no, this page, we monitor web pages. I monitor 300 web pages, and every day I get like the one alert with 30, 40 changes. I look at it. I know what is happening in the industry. He said, great. I said, after that, what? And I said, okay, you got all this stuff. We finished all that. So after that, what are you doing with this kind of thing?
Right.
I said, yeah, after that, what? And you need to start thinking about what are you going to do? And then when you say, after that, what? Gives you a new set of requirements to go back and say,
right.
hey, let me go find the source.
And Dorai, I would relate it to, we used a social media company for a couple of conferences for an association that both of us are also a part of. Yeah. And the report came that there are 3 million eyeballs, etc., etc. Well, how many came in to buy the ticket? How many even visited the website? There was no correlation. There's just a whole lot of information that probably affects the vanity, but doesn't touch the top line or bottom line. Correct. So this is exactly how I would look at that. There's so much information that we get stuck in it. And taking a bit from the HE Insights blog that you shared, that information has to get converted into actionable intelligence. Yeah. And if that is not there, then what's the point? And back to you here.
Correct. So not all of it gets converted, right? It's sometimes you don't even find the kind of thing you're looking for in the information, but in the connections between these informations. Like, for example, you suddenly say that company X bought from company Y, or company X made this company Y a partner. And then you start looking, how did company X and company Y ever meet? They're in different industries. They're dissing sales guys. What is going on? Then you suddenly find out they share a board member. There's some dude sitting on the board of both these companies, and who might have just suggested, hey, have you looked at this company that I am on the board of? Maybe there is some synergy. Maybe you should. So the connections are many, and they are semantic connections in the sense that they're not like, okay, I link to your website, you link to my website kind of stuff. Not at that level, but much more than saying that, hey, there are these gaps in my product. And Jeffrey Moore, I have to keep bringing him back. Is this
Yes.
whole product concept? How do you go from your product to your whole product kind of stuff, and then you start finding all the complementary products around it that gives customer the experience that they want, which is what they're looking for, and selling them just an isolated piece of doing this kind of stuff. And that's the reason, like, why electric vehicles will not come and become popular unless you have the infrastructure to charge them all over the
Right.
place, and
Right.
those kinds of things. So what do you invest in?
I can relate to it because I invested in an electric scooter, the Ather. I love it, except there's always this fear of, hey, what will happen if I run out of charge? Because there are fewer points. Of course, they are working on it, but it still isn't a movement from what you say.
Correct. Yeah. So there is so these two things that I said I'll talk to you about is the gap business, right? So the
Right.
concept of missing nothing is what do you think happened before the concept of zero was invented? Right?
Nothing.
There was nothing, but everybody was missing something.
Yes.
Imagine writing all the numbers we can write in Roman numerals. So it's inadequate. It was good up to a certain point, but
Right.
beyond that you can't. So somebody came and said, "Hey, there is something between negative and positive. There has to be some little thing called zero, And I think the concept of zero is much more than that. But zero, and the moment he said zero, everything fell into place, and then the positional notation. I mean, everything became, So that is one missing nothing. The other missing nothing, and always get confused between this. Uranus, the discovery of a planet, right? Pluto, and nobody saw it, but somebody felt the gravitational pull. And some dude came and said, this is happening consistently in this orbit. So there has to be something in this space. Let's go look for it. And then looked for it and then found it, for example. I may be getting my planets mixed up, but that's a missing nothing. It's not it's missing nothing from our concept.
I have a segue to add here, Dorai. When my daughter was younger, and they were curious, she came and asked, "Is there another world? I don't believe there is another world, etc." Then I said she was familiar with using iPad and computers. So if you don't want a file, what you do? I delete it. Where does it go? It goes to the bin. Okay, removed from the bin. Where does it go? I don't know. So maybe there is. We don't know. But like the data, you never know. The missing nothing concept. Lovely.
Yeah,
lovely.
Correct. So when you delete from the bin, it becomes energy. Matter gets converted into energy. So yeah, you're right. So I think these are interesting gaps. I think these gaps give you some ideas, and the gaps come about when you start using product. But let's get back to the flow business. So the discovery is so how do you find? And this goes back to our influencers talk earlier. So if I want to, do higher ed, like education, and everybody knows education is going to change in some way, maybe at a very slow pace. Colleges and schools will still be there because there is a need for them, because people are going crazy sitting at home. So there will be need for these buildings and the social spaces kind of thing, but their function may change, for example. And because think about a teacher having 20, 40 students sitting in a class, half of them sleeping, or maybe 75% of them sleeping, and 2 or 3 people playing games, and only some 3 people hardly trying to listen in front row, can be very disheartening for somebody who's delivering a lecture.
Right.
On Zoom, it does. I don't really care because there is a static picture that somehow makes me feel as if there is a student present there. Only, and they are also muted. So only sometimes when you say, "Hey, Pravin, Pravin," two, three times, the person wakes up and says, "Yeah, yeah, I'm there." I was trying to unmute
My
myself.
mic was on mute.
My thing was on mute. So, so it maybe, and they figured out everything you can get from the internet. So teacher is more like a guide, and somebody who can answer all the questions, and you can, for self learners and that kind of stuff. So maybe it will shift, it will change, kind of thing. But why do you get clues for this change? So you look at all the issues of remote learning. Look at all engagement metrics, and there's a whole bunch of learning analytics, and then you start getting all these kinds of things, and then you start. So why do you gather the data? So first you start with some influencers and say what they say about the future of education. So that's always a nice Google search to do. Anything you want to know, the future of X, the future of X is Y, is the other popular thing. Is that what is going to be the future of education? And then there are a bunch of futurists who are sitting and thinking about it. What will happen if if you move to Mars, for example? You can't export all these teachers, and what happens to those kids there? Teachers, parents have to be teachers, kind of thing. But that's too far away. But let us look at a near future. What happens? And when you start thinking about this, you come up with these ideas that are applicable to even today's problems, right? What is the biggest problem in remote education right now, other than the infrastructure and all that sort of stuff? The inequity, right? I mean, there is the current system of education requires you to have a device that is connected to
Yes.
the internet, and you are supposed to have the certain amount of speed. And I had classes where two of the students would not send in exercises saying, "Sir, we don't have anything. We are listening to you through mobile devices. I can't type the code and send it from there because
Right.
I can't test it here," for example. So what do you do with them? And they don't have laptops at home. So that gives a new meaning to the infrastructure as to what students need to have if you shift to this mode of education norm. So there is this problem of haves and have-nots. So you start identifying all these kinds, and then you also start identifying this system is not perfect because it has got all these gaps. And these gaps are opportunities, or gaps are barriers to entry, or challenges for you to go into the next step, kind of thing. So the monitoring is, in fact, there is one diagram in which I saw is gather data, monitor, 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 monitor. That's the next 10 steps of the process. And that is true with traffic, like satellite, basically GPS monitoring of devices. Why are there clusters of traffic here, and all that kind of stuff and all. So that's one thing. I think the large amounts of data that you get is there are many ways in which the data can be handled. One is that data can be segmented, and all data is
Right.
not relevant. So each model you create looks at one slice of the data, for example. So if I take in a smart city, I look at the data from all the corners, I am definitely going to be inundated, right? But if I look at, hey, the traffic data, the energy consumption data, and they're kind of dependent, but the dependency is not as crucial as, like what we only know that if a couple of traffic lights go out, and this place is going to be a mess in terms of traffic, right?
Right. See,
So, yeah.
I get it clearly, Dorai, and I'm just trying to equate it to business here, again from HE Insights, that from all the technology information that is available, how marketing and sales teams are doing territory planning, how they are figuring out whom to contact. One is, of course, the market sizing that is there. However, good or bad, they use the data to go ahead and figure out. And once the territory is done, through the entire process, they are able to figure out what is the potential budget and what is the spend likely to be, and therefore, whom should I go ahead with? Now, when we relate back to the gaps and the processes that you're talking about, and also in terms of the information hops across sources, and especially in technology intelligence, there are several such parts that you'll have to connect the dots.
Correct.
How do we connect the dots?
So the thing is this, right? Like, when do you know when a technology is matured and has arrived? Like, so let us take the innovators, early adopters, late adopters, and then we'll forget about the
Right.
majority and the laggards later, right? So what do these? So take let's one example. What do these innovators read? Where do they hang out? What do these early majority read? Where do
Hmm.
they hang out? Where are these, like, the late majority, right, or the massive larger number of users do? So if you take that, so these guys, in the tech world, for example, the early majority are hacker news, tech meme, and a whole bunch of these things, right? In the current generation, of course, gets it from Instagram and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. And so that is the next one will be getting a lot of information from referential information from their associations, like SKIP we talked about, right? Society of Competitive Intelligence. What is your trade association? What is
Hmm.
your in your industry kind of thing? So they, in addition to getting information, but they tend to read, let's say, Business Week and Inc. magazine or Fortune, or I mean
Right.
some of those kinds of things. Then you go to the next level. They read New York Times or Washington Post or Globe. So if you see a product being covered in one of these little magazines, then hopping into a Business Week or a Time kind of thing, and hopping into Yahoo News, Microsoft News, Google News, that kind of thing, and then hopping into New York Times, you arrive, right? If there's a column about you in New York Times, it gets a very, very different, this is in the
But
US, right?
I love it that all our conversations end up coming back to this influencer in various forms. Here, in this case, the influencer is an innovator,
Correct.
early adopter. But I love
Correct.
it that it keeps going back to that. But please continue.
Yeah. There are various types of
Yes.
influences, right? You use the time, micro influences, which is awesome
Yes.
because I
Yeah.
think micro influences. So I'm likely to listen to my neighbor or my closest contact friends or inner circle for certain advice that I can trust. Okay, however much I like some hero, I'm not going to listen to take, Shah Rukh Khan's recommendation of what car I should buy next is not relevant to me because I can't afford. So he's
Yes.
appearing in some advertisement of some car. I said, okay, fine. Like he got paid for it, or that car I can't afford, for example. But if there is my you come, actually you are also a little too above my pay grade kind of thing. But let's say that. So you relate, right? And I say, okay, he has taken the decision, and he is very similar to me in personality kind of stuff. And then so micro influences tend to be very closely attached to. So in that hub, draw a network diagram, you see these little hubs and little spokes. You guys are clustered fairly quickly, like all of us live in Adyar or in Chennai or in this industry, or all members of
Right.
TAI. So there are all these connection spots where we are all peers in TAI Chennai, right? So for example, um, we listen to each other and have conversations because we are all doing the same thing to some extent, not different businesses, but in the same communities, helping same types of people, kind of thing. So yeah, but at some level, previously, before internet, who the gatekeepers were? The editors of the magazines and the journalists.
Yes. Yeah.
Just to get in front of them was like, on VCs. Imagine VCs. There's no way you can tweet them, and no way. Twitter has changed that. The
Yes.
internet has changed that. Internet has changed access. Web 2.0 has changed the interaction model. You can follow anybody on LinkedIn. You can send in a request
Right.
to follow. You can send a message. And if it is nicely worded, interesting, and something relevant to that what that person is doing, so which also means that you need to study them. So let us
Yes.
take the technology intelligence to a slightly different level, right? There's so much of others, like there's a people intelligence, right? So if we both share the same passion in a technology,
Hmm.
we're more likely to be have opinions about the direction of the technology or the
Right.
uses of the technology, and then we'll get into conversations, and these are Twitter threads now, right? Or they are Reddit subreddit conversations, that are taking place. So in the kind of magazines that I talked about earlier, I missed out some very influential magazines like Wired. MIT has a emerging tech magazine. So and then you go into a little more professional engineers. They're all like the IEEE magazines and those kinds of things. And it's a kind of academic plus industry kind of stuff. And so that's where people will look for information. So you have to be visible there in all those kinds of places for doing that. And they all provide you as to what they publish, what are the topics. Conferences in your space. Conferences always, and they do a lot of research on what are the most popular topics to attract people to attend the conferences, to find the speakers. They've already done all that work. So you can just go there and say, hey, who are the speakers in the conference? What is the bios of these speakers? Which companies do they work for? Which are the companies they are associated with? Where is their presence in the web? Some of them may be on Twitter and LinkedIn, and some of them may not be, but it doesn't matter. Like academicians tend not to be on any of these social media, but they hang out in an entirely different space. So.
Beautiful. So a whole bunch here. We did miss out speaking about artifacts, but we'll come to it in the next part. Yeah. One source leading to the next, the info hops across sources. What are the gaps, the missing nothing? Inside, in between the gaps, what do they share? How do they share? Connecting it back to our innovators, influencers as a part of the process. So Dorai, let's continue our conversation tomorrow, where I'm pretty certain you're going to be mixing process, innovators, the missing nothing, and some tools.
Yeah, so I'll just give you one keyword of artifact, knowledge graph, and then chew on it. There's enough for you to go and research. Ask me more questions.
Lovely. Knowledge graph. Well, here we come tomorrow with another conversation between Dorai and Pravin. Martech. Thank you, Dorai.
Thanks, Pravin. It was fun. Yeah.